We want to open up with a prayer song, just to break the ice here and get it rolling. This is from our Shaker Faith, it's a prayer song. So. Oh, 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 Thank you, Lord, for allowing us to use that song. Amen. Amen. Thank you. Okay, Kurt.
Thank you.
I have been with Doug and Jewell for about 40 years, 42, working in, I counted Jewell 17 countries around the world. The cat wasn't with us, but and in that time, I've said repeatedly about these two gentlemen. We see movies about action heroes and books about action heroes and people that can do this. And I just want to say, Laura, that, and I'm not exaggerating, I don't mean to embarrass, but these really are heroes, flesh and blood heroes that bring great divinity to the sacredness of nature and have devoted their lives to it. Jewell and Doug have a lot of background, educational and otherwise, but I want to start, if I may, with something that I think is, Jewell, we have talked about, all three of us have talked about. Jewell has a degree in political science, joint degree, and psychology. He has a joint degree in both of those, and of course, a life's experience as a painted person. But I'd like to know from you, Jewell and Doug, in Lummi tradition, in Lummi ways, Shalangan, how do they approach this issue of what we call out here mental illness? How is that approached in the Lummi way? And I'm just opening up for your thoughts.
Go ahead. First of all, you got a historical, traditional system. Then we have this colonial trauma as Indigenous peoples, Native Americans, as First Nations peoples of Canada. Our family were Nanaimo off Vancouver Island, Catesy on the Fraser River. We're Simiama
just south of the Canadian border. We're Nooksack, we're Lummi, we're Jamestown, Kalalam, we're Snoqualmie, we're Duwamish, and we have relations in all the tribes in between. At one time, you were raised from a child on to have a strong mind. You know, and I was talking to my brother a little bit. I said, you know, we got to recognize that before contact, the diseases came through. And there's speculation as to whether or not smallpox came with Cortez and up through Mexico, southwest USA, and on up into the Oregon Territory, which would include later on Washington Territory. How early did that disease come through and wipe out 80–90% of the population? We know it showed up at least in the 1770s, a couple hundred years later, and went through and devastated the population. So what happens is that you end up with a lot of people gone. A lot of traditions disappeared. A lot of traditional knowledge and traditional ways of healing either disappeared or it became challenged, because at one time we never had those diseases. We lived in a land of plenty and we were healthy. We lived with nature. And when those European diseases came in, we had no immunities. And so we didn't even have a word for it. The only closest we had was it was some type of evil spirit. It would sweep through a village and wipe everybody out almost overnight, leaving 1 or 2 children left, or a few adults. And so with that amount of massive knowledge lost, you can imagine the trauma. Yeah, but there are still people that knew the traditional healing methods. And when their traditional healing didn't kill off the evil spirit, they were killed themselves. So we're talking about real serious trauma where our native population has really strived to rebuild. You know, we had a tradition of marrying into each other's tribal villages and sharing of technology. And we began to rebuild, and part of the traditional to start swimming in the winter water would take a arrow. According to my uncle, or my late uncle, he said, at one time I would have taken an arrow way up into the mountains, hit it in a stump. Your parents would have told you where it is approximately. And they would tell you to go up to that mountain and find that arrow. And if you don't find it, don't come back. Because they didn't want a weak child. They didn't want a child that gave up. And so that child would go out to those, up into that mountain pasture and overcome all the fears, all the mental weaknesses that made him weak. He'd bring that arrow back. And if he was lucky, he was exposed to a guardian spirit. And if he came back with a guardian spirit, because all things in our belief system had spirit. And so if he came back with a guardian spirit that had pity on him, they would drum that out, and he'd end up with a song and a dance. You know, something that would get him through life. And if he was lucky, that spirit either could do a couple things. If it was, there are those type that made him a medicine person, but the more general one was one that just came to him to give him the gifts to survive. Could make him a totem pole carver, a canoe carver, an expert hunter. And so there are those type of gifts that the child would encounter on a traditional scale. But because of the trauma in the community, now we got to understand when we say, well, what about these healing practices? we're taking that question with the assumption that we're still a complete society with all that we had. Well, there's a lot of cracks in the diamond. There's been a lot of fractures. And that diamond doesn't glow as bright as it did once. And so the amount of lost knowledge has resulted in lost teachings. And so the children have become weaker. And if we make our 3-year-old get up and go swim in freezing ice waters today, they'd throw us in jail for child abuse. If we made a 14-year-old do that, they'd throw us in jail for child abuse. They'd take our children away. And this was still a problem for Native American practitioners. If we had our way, we'd go start teaching what would make that child a strong person mentally, socially, physically, spiritually, and in relationships to the environment around him or her. Everything required belief. You had to believe, and you're trained how to think. And they had a saying that the worst thing you could say about somebody was "awan." It was so bad you'd go like this. You wouldn't even let anybody see you saying it. That's how horrible it was what you just said. "Awan schnup." And what it translates to is poor pitiful thing. They have no teachings. Don't even look at them. It's terrible. Their people taught them nothing. And so for an elder or an adult to say that about a child or a teenager now or a young adult or another person, it was a real insult. And so if you would have said it out loud, you could have had an intertribal, inter-village war, because people were proud to be able to teach traditional knowledge systems within their family. And some of those traditional teachings were healing practices. We have secret societies where young initiates are brought in, but we're surrounded by healing practices. We have the Sweat Lodge, and we also have the introduced Shaker Church, and that was a blending between Native Americans and Christianity. Part of that traumatic experience is the United States, even though we're, my mom used to cry. They gave my grandma's people smallpox, and she would just cry. It'd break her heart. Well, the smallpox epidemic she was talking about was in the 1860s. It started out in Victoria. They could have immunized those Indians, but they knew. They purposely sent them out with smallpox. It killed a massive die-off again. It's not that long ago. It's in my mom's memory. The pain was in my mom's memory. And her grandmother survived that and fled into Canada. But usually the people who are fleeing from smallpox just delivered it to another community. So we still have memory, and part of that memory is the church. People that were singing songs or practicing Native American traditional medicines or healing practices were called devils. They were devil worshiping. And the church worked with the government, and they got the American Indian Religious Crimes Code enforced. For us, it was supposed to have been done by 1924, but by 1978, it was still so bad they had to pass the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. And from 1978 to 1998, we had to overcome all the U.S. Supreme Court decisions that was wiping out our spiritual practices. They took away our feathers. They locked up our Siouan leaders from our winter ceremony. They took away the peyote from the peyote church. We have peyote church here. And that's in the 1990s. That's in your life, your lifetime. We're still fresh from the battle of trying to get religious freedom, because religious freedom incorporates all the healing practices that we exercise within the community. We try to save their body and their mind and their spirit and their social relationships within their family and community. You know, and worldwide, part of the problems with the question on Native American healing systems is that those traumatized people that survived generation after generation of massive death and loss and grief resorted to self-healing under the new culture, not under the old culture. The old culture was illegal to practice it. My brother and I, we had our great grandmother and great grandfather on both my mom's side and our dad's side were painted people. And they would have to go deep into the woods and practice Siouan healing ceremony. Because if the farmer in charge heard, he could take all of them and throw them right into prison. No trial, no jury, no lawyer. Our great grandma was Squidillich, a special type of healing person. If he found out she was using that, she went right to prison. And this is taught to us in our life. My grandma, she was Dutch, and her best friend was our grandaunt. Our grandpa had a sister, and they were real close. And our grandaunt would take our Dutch grandma out into the woods and let her peek through the boards and watch the Indian healing ceremonies. Neither one of them could go in there. They were too young. Girls at 14. But it was so much risk tied to it that you're under the threat of death for exposing healing practices. You know, my brother and I are painted face dancers. He's brown paint, I'm red paint. You know, I was brown, now I'm red. You know, our relatives are black paints. But we went out and started telling everybody how to use our method of healing. At one time, they would have just strung us up right there. No questions asked. And part of that is because most of the time when non-natives come in to look at our healing practices, either they're writing about it or they're working with somebody to oppress it. That's been our experience. It has been a good one. You know, my brother, he's Shaker. Shaker, our slow, they call it slow Slocum, but Slocum died and came back. And his wife interpreted where he was. He came back with a vision. He was dead. Our great grandmother sat there with the body with his wife. And she was there when it became interpreted, and it gave birth to what they call the Shaker Indian religion. And so that's one of the ways that he helps our people with that. It was a blending. It was the only way that we could have a native ceremony under a disguise of Christianity. The only other way that we could do that from the 1870s on was to celebrate either the treaty or some president's birthday or something. It had to be acceptable to the white people in charge of the Indians. And so we've grown up in a society where we're told Don't talk. Don't tell them anything, because it's going to come back around and hurt us. They're just going to keep taking and taking and taking. And they will use it, and they make it illegal for us to use it. And that's part of the way we think. It's a matter of habit, and it's a matter of necessity.
Jewell, I wonder if you said something when we were talking before this interview started about along these lines about the plastic medicine people. I think it may be important to touch on that a little bit.
Well, I did a lot of traveling with I'm proud to say, to participate in some of the debates on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I got in on the end, but that didn't stop me from being an aggressive, outspoken representative from our community, because I operate from the view that women, children, and elders are dying at home and suffering. You weren't sent out there to be silent. You're sent out there with a warrior spirit to defend their rights in the future generations. So don't you sit there on your hands with your mouth shut and listening to propaganda that will come back and hurt our people. And so I've always been aggressive like that. And I was able to work with a national tribal elders group. And our central topic was Native American religious freedom and practices. The late Reuben Snake was the head of the National Peyote Church, Native American Church National. And a real strong medicine person, roadman. He's like 6'5", 450 pounds, big man. So I got to walk next to his elbow. But we fought. We fought along with Suzanne Schoenhardt. She's alive yet. Great woman, a warrioress for Indian country and Indian religious freedom. And we helped overcome the Supreme Court decisions that suppressed our people. And so we got the peyote back, we got the feathers back, we got the rights for federal prisoners for rituals. Of course, the Indian tribes all organized to even be able to recover the bodies of our ancestors. And you think, what does that have to do with native healing? You dig up one of our ancestors and their spiritual unrest. People start dreaming of the ancestors. They start getting messages in their dreams. Children start being talked to, and their sleep is disrupted by the elders looking for peace. Somebody come and get us, put us back to rest. Time and time again, Dr. Rousseau worked with our Lummi Culture Protection Department and Committee. We helped create them specifically to begin dealing with the enormous amount of our ancestors being dug up in our ancestral villages for modern homes and modern offices. Development was moving in, and it's constantly going on throughout Indian country. It's been so major that the Indian tribes had to go to Congress and get the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act passed to get our ancestors' bodies back. And see what that does? It creates a cultural, traditional, spiritual, emotional damage to the living. And then their body becomes disrupted. You'd say the chakras were blocked. And all of a sudden they're starting to have mental problems and physical problems. And it starts impacting the family and it spreads outward. And we do everything we can to try to stop that. And so we try to take care of our ancestors and put them to rest again. But these things are ongoing. And we have to know what we're dealing with. I remember back in '79, I was on the council, and a little girl was in a local public school, 3rd grade. And this little boy came in and goes, my dad brought this in home. He says it's an Indian skull from Simiyama. And the little girl just started screaming and crying. She was in hysterics, just a little girl in hysterics. She was so shaken and scared. They had to bring her into the nurse's station to try to calm her down. She wouldn't calm down. They ended up calling the police in. That little girl was crying because it was her relatives. She was from those people. She was just raised on our reservation. That little 3rd grader knew, based on her family teachings. That little boy brought in her ancestors. And so we ended up going and recovering all those bodies out of the university. We had to bury them. I had to go through special training by the elders on how to conduct myself and prepare myself for that work. So Native American healing practices, there's a common knowledge about how to prepare yourself. I'm going to talk about sweat a little bit and shaker.
Doug, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, we asked for guidance, we'll go into the sweat lodge for purification, that to prepare for what we have to move forward through, and we would put it to prayer. We would ask for guidance. And so as we take care of such things as reburying our elders, you have to be of one heart and one mind. You can't allow yourself to, your mind to wander on worldly things to do this. You got to really concentrate and prepare yourself, prepare your heart and your mind to deal with this, because you're dealing with your relatives, your ancestors. And so as we seen and heard this happen, that once our relatives are disturbed and dug up, we went through quite an ordeal a few years back to where there was a whole lot of our relatives' remains were dug up, and they were loaded in dump trucks and dumped in an off site. They were going to put in a sewer plant there. We had to train our people to go in and sift through all of them loads and loads of dirt that they dumped, to sift through and find the bones of them elders, them remains. And they were upset. They wanted to go back to where they originally were taken from. So this is an ongoing issue, that happens throughout our world, this day and age, like Jewell was saying, for new buildings, new homes, bridges, or whatever, these old sites are still out there, and to disturb them, there's a lot of spiritual activity that takes place.
Brushing people off like cedar. And
shaker. What we do, is we prepare our ones that do this work by, at the end of the day, would spiritually brush them off with cedar bough. The cedar bough is a very powerful tool that we use, spiritually to spiritually cleanse them, that they don't take anything back home with them. So, we just reaching out that way, just kind of share just a little bit of snuff about what we do here. And
shaker was a combination of Indian and Christianity to clean people up too.
Yeah. You might notice the candle that's burning behind us here, that you know, it just, we use that to light a person up, you know, to help take away any darkness that might be hanging on to them, you know, and, you know, we understand, you know, that the spiritual world is very real. It's 10 times more powerful than what the seen world is, you know, and so that's why it's very, very important to start with a prayer and end this with a prayer, you know. And these prayer songs, you know, they're just gifts for us to use. They're not ours, you know. These songs will come to us, you know, and that's why, you know, I was saying, you know, giving thanks for our Heavenly Father for allowing us to use that song to open up the way to take care of this. And so, and when we close, we'll close it with a prayer like that, with a prayer song. So, you know, just a little bit of something that I wanted to share here. So,
You had another question, Kurt?
Well, I have a couple. I would like to ask now, because you mentioned something that had me. You mentioned it a little while ago that everything has a spirit. Rocks have spirit. Plants have spirit. And I guess, how would you answer a question if someone were to ask you this? What are some of the ways tradition awakens that healing spirit in plants? How would you answer a question like that?
Well, you know, the people that are healers, especially those that will use plants in their healing systems, will tell you, if you ask them specifically, when you say, you know, I seen what you did, I tried to do what you did, and it didn't work. That plant didn't heal me. And for it's part of our cultural understanding that you have to sacrifice, you have to train. You can't just say, I want to do that, and then everything's going to go your way. And it's almost, you have a vibrating body. The earth vibrates. All things vibrate. And some vibrations help others tune. And so the traditional people that use plants know that first they have a ceremonial respect before they even approach the plant, before they even go into the forest. They have to have ceremonial respect, not just for what's outside of you, but it's for balancing what's inside you. Inside of you has got to balance with what's outside of you. Otherwise, you're not fully able to access what's in that forest. When you finally get to the plant, you have to ask permission to harvest, but you also have to thank it for sacrificing its life for you. There's a lot of Native Americans will say, pray. Pray at sun when the sun rises, you get up and you pray. And don't you forget, something died for you today. You hear that? Something died for you today. Something sacrificed itself for you. So appreciate that. Something is suffering and dying for you. And so those elders, they'll say there's also special songs to entice that plant to accept you, to work with you. Yeah, there's sacred words. If you're raised to be a healer, you're going to get those sacred words. You know, and it's top secret. You know, people will say, no, my great grandma handed that down. I can't tell you, says your sister to her brother, because that's woman's knowledge. So even within the families, there's restrictions,
Oh.
and there's teachings, and gender specific. And we all have our duties and responsibilities. And men and women are healers, ceremonial leaders. That itself is not gender specific, but there is traditional knowledge that goes with the gifts that come down through lines on the use of certain plants. It's called Siwan. Got those sacred words, and you would know what those words are. And it'll come to you, they'll teach you in a dream, or it's passed down from ancestors. And all of that comes together to create the healing plant, the healing experience with that plant.
I wonder if I can segue, Jewell, with that. And I really, this is a question, or I guess a question for you both. To your listeners and viewers here, Laura, these two gentlemen, along with a few others, have gone over 60,000, that's 60,000 miles with different totem poles to bring healing to nature, protective healing to nature, and to the American people who suffered on 9/11. I need to add one thing about that. These were not federal grants. These were not projects. These two gentlemen carved these poles. They didn't get paid anything. They gave these poles away, and they were big totem poles, and they were long journeys. And I was going to ask them both, especially about the first 3 journeys. In 2002, 1 year after the trade towers went down, the Pentagon was hit, and Shanksville was hit. 1 year in 2002, these two gentlemen and their tribesmen drove totem pole across the United States, a dozen different tribal blessings, traditional blessings. That totem pole now stands in upstate New York, Laura, Sterling Forest. That's where it is. And it is the center of activity to help heal orphans of war. That totem pole. But it was for those who lost loved ones in the trade towers. And those loved ones were at Sterling Forest on September 11th, 2002, when Jewell and Doug's totem pole was stood up. And it was stood up in Shanksville, another totem pole, and another totem pole at the Pentagon. 30,000 pounds of totem poles at the Pentagon. Jewell and Doug, question. You've often said this. It's not the totem pole that's sacred. What is the healing that these journeys are about? We're about on 9/11. What is the healing as you understand it? You were the man that carved the pole. They were your vision. Doug, you were on all the journeys. You saw the effect. What was the healing that took place? If I can ask that.
Well,
Go ahead.
We're a society that has a lot of indigenous knowledge that passed down from the different races. Talking about the USA. Everybody in the United States came from somebody, from some place. And everybody in the United States came from a people that had a relationship with the earth at one time. It doesn't matter where they say they're from. They go back enough generations, they lived with the earth and they had teachings. And when we carve something, sing something, dance something, use some type of a symbolic tool or instrument, we're awakening something inside them. If you don't believe it, you can study the teachings of Carl Jung. Okay, and on the importance of symbols. It's incorporated into our society and into our religion, and spirituality. And we're told by an elder from Vancouver Island when we began our first journey, don't you ever forget, the totem pole is not the sacred thing. It's the gathering of the people that you call forward that creates the sacred moment. Go ahead.
It was the 9/11 pole, the healing pole journey, the very first one, that we really didn't see the depth of what was going to happen when we started that journey. When we got halfway across the country, we truly understood the power of making a gesture to reach out to those that were lost in the Twin Towers and those that were left behind, that they needed something to pull them together. And that's when we really understood the depth of the carving that we did. That's not what's sacred. What was sacred was all of those people that understood that they wanted to come and just put their hand on that pole. And we're telling them, send your prayer across country. And it was the power of the prayer that pulling the people to come together, to be of one heart and one mind, and just concentrating on that spiritual part of which touches all of us. You allow the spirit to reach down and touch that part of you inside that has been longing for that connection. And so it was an awakening. And so that's what, caused us to reach out, to those at Shanksville in Flight 93, where they sacrificed their lives, and so we stood a pole in Shanksville Park. We went right to the crash site and allowed them people to come together and pray together. It wasn't us doing it. It was the spiritual movement that was taking place. And so, like Kurt said, we did a 3-piece pole for the Pentagon. And that drew a lot of people to come together and pray together. And when that was all said and done, these were all gifts. We stood that one in the Congressional Cemetery, where it stands to this day. So, if we don't listen to the spirit that's tugging at your heartstrings, none of this is going to take place. You have to step out of yourself in order to make something happen. Just step out. You want to serve your people. Step out. Give a child a cup of water in the Lord's name. The spiritual connection happens. There's a gift in that. These spiritual gifts keep coming to us this way.
There was we're 1/3 or halfway, and we came out. There was no gathering. We weren't doing any ceremonies. We stopped for lunch. There was a little boy kneeling on next to the pole, probably about 4 years old, praying. Just standing there by himself. The parents were off a few feet away from the trailer, letting him do his thing. Just a little boy all by himself. And one woman came, she goes, I just drove from 2 states to get here, just to touch it. And she started crying. She goes, my daughter died in the Twin Towers. I didn't know what to do. I seen this totem pole remembering her. I drove her through 2 states to get here, just to say thank you. You give me a hope. And she touched it and prayed and went home. I remember this little boy, he was 9, at Sterling Forest. He said, my dad's a fireman. My dad was big and healthy and husky. He went in and saved people and brought them out 3 times. And then the fourth time, he didn't come out. He goes, I'm here because my dad's a hero. And I get to remember him today. That was at pole racing.
Yes.
I remember this retired veteran flew to Lummi, and he carved on one of the poles. And his story was, my wife of 25 years was at work that day.
Yeah.
And it was our anniversary. And so I made her the best meal. I got her the finest wine I could find, and I got some of the freshest flowers I could locate. And I was so proud to be able to do this for the woman I loved. I sat down and waited for her to come home. And Flight 77 hit her office right, top dead center. Only DNA proved to me that she was still there. So I flew out here to carve on this pole, this Pentagon pole, to begin my healing. And I'll begin here and I'll be on the other end, waiting. So, yeah, see, in Indian country, we know what it's like to lose a loved one, because we have the highest infant mortality and the shortest life expectancy in the country, the highest poverty, and the lowest educational or vocational attainment, and the poorest housing, highest unemployment and underemployment. And we're losing people right and left on a regular basis. We never know who today will be gone tomorrow. And so our community is always in grief. We've learned to live with grief. It's been like that from the point, even before first contact. So we understand grief. When the White House wanted to come to our gatherings, we said, this is about healing and overcoming grief.
Yeah.
You can come as long as it's not political, because people are here to heal, not to hear politics.
At the beginning of this session, I mentioned that the world is full of action heroes in movies, and at least in my book, in the real world, these two gentlemen represent a kind of authenticity that's grounded in compassion, as you probably heard, and compelled by the courage of real conviction. They've always been that to me, and I think that came across, I hope it came across the heart and mind of it. And I wonder, Doug, as we're approaching the end of the hour, if we could close this with a prayer.
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, you've seen everything from the beginning, and you know the end. As we move forward, reaching out spiritually to be of one heart and one mind, I'd swallowing. It's like the orca that we've been trying to bring home. That's down in Miami. We're calling people to be of one heart, mind, one mind. It's that spiritual movement that we're reaching out to, Lord. And we're asking that you continue to open the doors that need to be open and close the doors that need to be closed. We're putting everything at the foot of your cross, Lord. And we're reaching out to you to continue to help us along the way with these journeys that lie ahead of us, and that you're going to watch over this country. We're asking that you strengthen us against the virus pandemic that's going on, We're just reaching out to all of our nostalgia, all of our relations out there across this vast country to come together with a prayer to lift up each other in a good spiritual way throughout this upcoming Christmas holiday. Be safe. Oh, 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 I, 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 oh, oh, I, oh, I, I, Haishka. The Illumination Haishka.
We hear songs and everything, and we're taught to respect those songs. And I just want to end this talk with a recognizing that that song there is a blending of the two worlds. Yeah, in the old Hebrew Bible at one time, they had written God's word name, but it was because it was so sacred, it was taken out 1,800 times. But it could only be sung. That's one thing about Indian country. The sacred has to be sung. And God's word, God's name was like this. You had to sing it 3 times. That was the prayer. That's how you prayed with God's name. And so Native American people always believed. And there's an old legend that thousands of years ago, a man came and he had scars on his hands. And he went from village to village throughout the Americas, South America, Middle America, and North America. And he was teaching the way of peace. And wherever he went, he left a marker for the people. And those people used that marker to say that he came here. And it was like this. He held up both hands, showing. And he would go like this. And wherever that man went, you'll find the people saying, "Oh, Siam." Or they'd raise one hand. That just tells you that that person came here, shared the way of peace, and then left. And that's who the Aztecs thought Cortez was, coming back.
Chút cái vì cái